This is Wycombe Sound.
Hello everybody, you're listening to The Art Show on 106.6 FM at Wycombe Sound. I'm your host Dane Cobain. This is the weekly show where we chat about the local arts news. We have a different guest on each week. We share some local music, any events news, etc. We also head over to the Rhylight Zone for some sort of a creative reading, whether it's of fiction, poetry, etc, etc. And we also head over to Twangling Jack Ford over in the Yorkshire later on for a weekly album review. So this week we are going to be doing a chat with Ken Boyter. Ken has also sent us a reading of his for the Rhylight Zone. So without further ado, over to Ken.
Mythical Tales from Edra, Curse of the Prophet, scribed by Loquacious Macabre. For those of you who are accustomed to fine folk tales and storytelling, you recognise a truthful tale from a tall tale. You will also know that I, Loquacious Macabre, the greatest storyteller in all of Edra, never tell falsehoods, but only stories which ring true. Even if the ale has been flowing and I'm several pints down, my tales still entertain my adoring public. You join me tonight, not for the first time for some, in this fine establishment, the Rusty Axe Tavern, for another of my mythical tales of wonder. I do hope you've beer in hand and are settled enough for me to begin. Very well. I shall begin where you would expect, and end where the unexpected is to be found. It was a bright, fresh, crisp morning in the pleasant village of Badger's Tail, roughly north of Tumbledown Woods, in the Shire of Atros. Cornelius Drabble was up with the dawn and the chirping birds, pottering about in his tumble-down home as was his wont. Drabble, like his dwelling, had seen better days. Some likened him to an old musty book, its cover a bit dusty and creased, and its pages dog-eared and a little stained. Nevertheless, even with a crusty book, if all the pages are present, words can still be read, and Drabble most certainly still had all his pages. He wore several layers of white light linen under a forest green tunic, his hood and cuffs trimmed with an intricate pattern of gold, with a fine red and gold waistcoat, as was customary for his profession. For you see, Drabble was a water scryer in the common parlance, and proud to be part of the Euromancers Guild. Like all guilds across Edra, no matter what shire, they only accepted legitimate, bona fide professional practitioners. Drabble had been part of a guild so long that he couldn't remember a time when he wasn't a member, and even if he could, he thought it not important enough to remember. Once dressed, and with his soft leather comfy turn shoes on, he carefully made his way down the creaky wooden spiral staircase which led directly into his large, heaving kitchen, which seemed to take deep breaths whenever Drabble entered. A cascade of vines, plants and small woodland creatures crisscrossed most surfaces, allowing the water scryer just enough space to accomplish his daily tasks. The first of which was to turn on and listen to the crystal oscillator whilst he gathered up a small amount of kindling, placed it in the fireplace and set it aflame. Once strong enough, he tossed a few logs onto the fire and placed the large iron kettle over it. Nothing says morning more than a boiling kettle. While Drabble waited for the water to boil, he cleared a small space on the large wooden table and set his diary down, took hold of his quill and dipped it in the nearby ink pot that was precisely teetering on the brink of several papers, and patiently waited. The familiar and therefore comforting words of the announcer, floating from the oscillator, began to wash over him. Drabble had never wondered what the announcer looked like, and took a modest joy in believing the voice crossing the airwaves was unattached to an actual body, that it was some kind of benevolent detached being sharing the day's predictions. And now the scrying forecast issued by the Guild of Scryers at 0543 on Drura Day. There are warnings of strong myth-magic slippage in all areas except for Behemoth. The general synopsis at 600, low, 200 miles south of Crooked Smile Island, drifting slowly east. Drabble began his note-taking, his handwriting neat and precise. The area magical forecast for the next 24 hours. Warrior, south, becoming variable at times, 2 to 4. Smooth or slight. Spark patches later. Moderate or good, occasionally very poor. Homunculi, variable 3 or 4. Smooth or slight. Occasionally moderate at first. Fair, good. Mist blight, variable 4 or 5. Slight or moderate. Thundery geotic magi showers in south. Rod of souls, variable, becoming northeasterly later, 3 to 5. Slight or moderate. Thin dispersal of magical rain with thickening myth magic fog patches. Moderate or good, occasionally very poor later. Suddenly the shrill, high-pitched noise of the kettle boiling cut into Drabble's concentration. He carefully stood his quill in the ink pot, got up and attended the singing metal. Having set a mixture of tea leaves into a mug the night before, he cautiously poured the hot water. Thin dispersal of magical rain with thickening myth magic fog patches, he pondered out loud. He found that voicing his thoughts carried more resonance. Once the mug was full, he placed the kettle back to its resting place and carried his tea and his scrying forecast diary through to his practice, enjoying the fragile fragrance of the Camellia sinensis leaves as their fusion with the heat and water continued. His practice was the modest-sized reception room at the front. The walls were lined with many books, parchments, maps of Edra, an atlas of the stars and planets, charts, diagrams, and what appeared to be spells of various magical disciplines. This room was just as crammed as the kitchen, and you would actually have to remove a book to believe the room had any walls at all. Opposite the round-headed wooden door, with the round window by one side, was a large oak desk, solid and imposing, with a simple chair for clients tucked neatly under the side nearest the door. Unlike the kitchen table, this was a sanctuary for organisation. Every object was placed precisely where it was needed. The candle holder with the long taper candle sat front left nearest to the client. Behind the candle, nearer to where Drabble sat in his sturdy oak scissor chair, with its finely carved Guild of Scrying crest set in the back, was another inkpot, replenished at the end of each day. Below the inkpot was his current quill in its wooden quill holder. Next to that and directly in front of the chair were several sheets of fine parchment ordered in from Lantern's End, the nearest city. To the right of the parchment, on a large cloth, sat a large glass bowl, his divination bowl. An array of differently sized glass flasks sat upon several shelves across one wall, most long-necked with bulbous bottoms. Dominating the room, however, was a large colourful wall hanging of the most important of Drabble's tools, the Euromancer's Wheel of Prognosis. This comprised 20 illustrations of flasks, each showing different colours ranging from white as well water to ruddy as pure intense gold, and lastly black as very dark horn. Drabble cross-referenced these colours with his book of medical water scrygers, tabulations and calculations, and his book of astromancy and divinations predictions to make his diagnoses. Drabble set his tea down on the coaster, also on the left-hand side of the parchment, and quickly set about lighting the fire in the fireplace. Once substantial flames were licking a few logs, he plopped into his chair with a relaxing sigh and began rereading today's forecast while he waited for his first client. His wait wasn't too long. He liked to start early and finish early, despite having a long list of appointments. Drabble knew the restorative properties of rest, and as such, loved to indulge in his passion of dowsing. For those unfamiliar with the practice of dowsing, I can highly recommend Mr. Thunk Twist's Book of Divination and Other Dowsing Practices. This is, some may say, the definitive book, and explains the technique in far more detail than I could, but here is the gist. Dowsing utilises two L-shaped witching rods, or divining rods, that, when held out in front of the diviner, is used to locate ground water, buried metals and ores, gemstones, oil, grave sites, dragon lay paths, and other objects and materials. It is the gemstones and buried metals that our water scryger is interested in. In other words, buried treasure. This passion of Drabble's had been with him since he was a boy. His father regularly took him all around the village and surrounding fields with the hope of finding precious objects, some of which had magical properties. Various amulets and talismans adorned his father's study, and over time a small but beautiful collection of objects was on display. The joy Drabble felt as he shared time with his father was immeasurable. What boy wouldn't want to spend time with his father? This secured his lifelong passion for the hobby. Some would even say it had become an obsession. It wasn't until word reached his father of a local secret, and in turn reached him, that passion spilt over into desire. This secret wasn't one of those secrets that everyone knows about, no, but one of those secrets where whispers weren't even said, and only the silent movement of a person's lips was enough to convey just how secret this secret was. I only tell you this now because of the sheer respect you, my ever-eager audience, have for the love of storytelling, of course. The Curse of the Revengeful Astromancer, as it became known, tells of how a powerful book regarding all of Horary astrologers' secrets became buried with one of the most celebrated and famous astrologers of past. Moray Monty Moritz Mortimer Mungo III, Royal Astromancer and Master Water Scryger. He had astrology and divination running through his waters, so to speak, and so gained a reputation for accurate predictions. Not only the day-to-day matters of village and city folk alike, but of political and spiritual matters, something that began to ruffle a few feathers in high-up places. Government, the king, and the church grew, in ever-increasing tones, uncomfortable with Mortimer Mungo's forecasts. His troubles really brewed when he published his annual almanac and was achieving sales of around 30,000 copies a year. When an astrological prediction of the occurrences in Edra was first published, it caused a minor brouhaha as he predicted the usurping of the king of Atros by the years out. Obviously the current king, King Rutanus VIII, was enraged and ordered all of Mortimer Mungo's almanacs to be burnt. As I'm sure you are aware, burning a book or manuscript won't change the outcome if it is destined to happen. And so it came to pass. The king was indeed usurped by his brother Ranulf, the Prince of Three Sisters Isles, who claimed the king was mad and needed to step down from his royal obligations and duties. A powerful struggle ensued, and the brother and his supporters won. Luckily for Mortimer Mungo, the newly appointed king quashed any charges against him, claiming the old king was not sound of mind. Safe to continue to publish his predictions, he set about publication for the following year's almanac. You don't need to be a scryer to know the publicity he received bolstered sales, and so the tradition of his annual publications of predictions was born. His fame grew, and so did his client list. He lived a further 30 years, still sparking more outrage, but his predictions seemed uncannily accurate, and therefore his services were sought by all sectors of society. Being a kindly soul, he would run his predictions, divination and water scrying clinics, so all had access regardless of social status. When the fates had spoken, and he was on his deathbed due to old age, and not one to have a natural successor, he entrusted his most able and well-liked apprentice with his prized possession, a book containing not only his teachings and methodology, but also far deeper secrets of the universe. Hence, it became known as the Book of Secrets. At first, the apprentice refused the book, fearing it would bring him nothing but sour luck. He knew it would become a target of the worst kind of people, those who sought power to rule over others. But over time, Mortimer Mungo convinced his apprentice to take it and keep the knowledge alive so that it can be a force for goodness in the world. Reluctantly, he agreed and securely hid the book. Soon after Mortimer Mungo crossed to the next realm, the apprentice's fears began to be realized as several people from various factions approached him for the book. Some were open and tried to persuade him to share the book's secrets. Others offered gold coglets and other treasures, while others were more underhand. None were successful in obtaining the book, however, and to this day no one knows where the book is. Many rumours were born. It's been smuggled overseas. It's been burnt along with Mortimer Mungo. It's buried in Mortimer Mungo's coffin. It never really existed, just a myth. Whatever the truth, his teachings were passed down from mouth to ear through the generations and spread far and wide. As time passed, many a folk declared they were going to find the book and glean its powerful secrets. But over time, many a folk searched and failed. Some dedicated their whole lives to this quest, giving up jobs or ignoring their families so they became estranged. Out of this book fever obsession grew the fact that those who went seeking the book would inevitably fall victim to the curse. Just what this curse was seemed to differ depending on who you asked. Some said it sent you mad. Some said it caused horrifying injuries, or worse, death. Others said once you started looking for the book, the protective spirit of Mortimer Mungo would attach itself to you like a poltergeist and haunt you by pinching, biting, hitting you, and cause household items to fly around your rooms until the day you died. But of course, Drabble was too rational a man to believe such nonsense, wasn't he? Well, on the one hand, yes, but on the other hand, no. The thought of a mystical, powerful book with hidden secrets attracted his curious, professional and ambitious mind. Just think of how his career as a foreseer would expand. No more predicting the future of farmers worried if their crops would fail this year, or serving maids from taverns worried if such and such or so would marry them or not, or if the warts would drop off naturally, or they would need a herb healer's help. No more mundane day-to-day predictions. Drabble wanted the juicy morsels. Who would be the next grand faith mage of Lantern's End? When would the Queen die? How would the Queen die? Would the Oglar Republic attack, given the current political situation? For countless years a nagging feeling deep within gently gnawed away, little by little, bit by bit, until he could resist no longer. Somehow the book was calling him through the ether, almost taunting him to discover it. At first his father, by now in his twilight years, accompanied him on his excursions, both enjoying the quite anticipatory excitement of dowsing. But now, a few years since his father crossed over, it was Kester, the village cartographer, who would meet Drabble in various locations across the Shire. The brass knocker thundered Drabble's thoughts away. With a jolt, he sprang from his chair and crossed towards the door in one swift motion. He unbolted the door and opened it wide. Standing expectantly was a woman in her early 20s, her long wavy hair set atop her head with a few strands rebelling and framing her thin face like wisteria. Her eyes were sharp and keen, her clothes simple and plain. She was holding her brown woolen cloak tightly. "Molly, come in," he welcomed, as Molly crossed the threshold and stood awkwardly by the fire. After closing the door, he walked briskly back to his desk, seated himself, picked up the quill, dipped it in the ink pot with 2 small, swift dunks, and began the consultation. "How are you, Molly?" he asked, more out of human concern rather than professional. "On the whole, I'm well enough, thank you," Molly replied. "Mrs. Gregson said to give you this," she continued, as she pulled a small package out of her bag and handed it to Drabble. "Oh, Molly, she shouldn't have. You shouldn't have. But thank you." "We know how much you like your Sprite's Delight, Mr. Drabble." "Ah, yes, none finer cheese. Thank you, and thank Mrs. Gregson for me," Drabble said, as he placed the small gift to one side. "How can I help you today, Molly? Medical or prediction?" he asked. His tone changed to formal. "Prediction," Molly said, as she shuffled from one foot to the next. Drabble stood from his chair and reached for one of the larger glass flasks from the shelf. "You know the way," he softly said, as he handed her the object. Molly took the flask, gave a small nod, and left the room. Drabble returned to his seat, opened his diary to the relevant page, picked up his quill, and dipped the nib into the ink. He began to write a few sentences under Molly's name. After a short while, Molly returned, concentrating intensely whilst holding the flask at arm's length, so as not to spill the watery contents. She placed it gingerly onto the large cloth next to Drabble's divination bowl. He thanked her, finished writing his sentence, looked up and inquired, "What's your question, Molly?" He took off his glasses, produced a small piece of cloth from his waistcoat pocket, and proceeded to clean each lens. "Well, it's a delicate matter, you understand, one I'm unsure of," Molly began, as she pulled the chair from its resting place and sat down. "I'm in love, you see, and I'm unsure whether or not to marry." Drabble returned his cloth to his waistcoat pocket and slipped his glasses back onto his nose. "Please, go on, Molly." "I'd rather not say too much, as I may get in trouble," she replied, her head tilted downwards so she could avert her gaze. "I see. I understand, Molly," Drabble said, as he took up his quill, dipped it in the ink, and jotted down the time. He then reached out for the flask, lifting it high at first, making sure it was fully in the light streaming through his window. The sun rays illuminated the clear white liquid. It would appear your love for this man is intoxicating you. It consumes you night and day?" Drabble asked, more confirmation than question. "Oh, yes, is all I could think of. How did you know?" Molly asked with surprise in her voice. Drabble ignored the question, and instead began to pour the liquid into the divination bowl. As soon as the liquid hit the bottom of the bowl, small, tightly packed bubbles emerged, causing a rather dramatic "aha" from him. He then withdrew from one of the desk drawers a small drinking glass and dunked it into the bowl. He gently sniffed the white liquid before taking a small sip. He swirled it around his mouth for a few seconds, as if tasting wine, and spat it back into the glass. "My advice is not to marry this man, for he is proud and somewhat selfish in nature. He thinks nothing of ignoring your wishes and desires, and will frequently, some might even say willfully, take courses of action just because you disagree. I would also lay my reputation down to say his 4 humours were out of balance, particularly the phlegm, showing signs of dominance. A far more agreeable match awaits you in the future, if you can wait." Drabble stopped abruptly. "Oh, Mr. Drabble, I wasn't expecting that. I've my heart set on him, though. I'll have to have a long, hard think about it now. Thank you, Mr. Drabble. Thank you kindly." Molly stood and reached into her bag for payment, but was interrupted by a loud and aggressive knocking on the door.
Bravo.
Drabble's name was
Bravo.
repeatedly shouted by a gruff
Bravo.
voice. Drabble muttered something under his breath about the next appointment not being due for another 15 minutes, when suddenly the door burst open, and in the doorway stood a thick-set man who was heavily panting, sweat pouring from his brow. "You the prophet?" His voice urgent. Drabble responded calmly and addressed Molly first. "Do excuse me, Molly. Best of luck, and do let me know what you decide." She nodded, placed the payment on the table, and made her way awkwardly outside as the thick-set man stepped aside. "Water Scriger and Euromancer, but nevertheless, do come in, Mr. Drabble asked as he held out his hand to wave him in. "Cruikshank, Mr. Cruikshank, on the count of—" His voice trailed away as he looked down to his legs. "On the account of your crooked legs. Yes, I see. Very unfortunate. Is this your query?" Drabble offered. "Oh, no, not at all. I was born with them. No, this is far more serious." A flash of terror flitted across his deep-set eyes. "May I sit down?" Yes, of course," he said as he made his way to his chair and also sat down. "I've been told you cure people," Cruikshank began. "Yes, although what I do is diagnose and predict. Most clients get their herbs from Calotte, the herb healer, or Gorway, the leech doctor, or even Winifred, the toad doctor." "What about curses?" Cruikshank asked. "Curses?" Drabble repeated. "Curses! I'm cursed!" Cruikshank claimed. "Well, curses are not my area of expertise," Drabble began. "I'm cursed, prophet, cursed! For the last year I've tried to break it, but no luck. Please!" Cruikshank was on the verge of begging. "I'll certainly do my best to help. Do go on," Drabble kindly offered. "I've been a treasure hunter for these past 30 years. That's not my trade, mind you. I'm a clockmaker. But I have found the odd pretty thing or two over the years. But there's one treasure I wish I never found." Drabble took off his glasses and proceeded to wipe the lenses, his face intense with concentration. "It was this very day last year, and me and my fellow treasure hunters were ecstatic. We managed to locate an ancient artifact, thought lost after 20 years of looking. We knew it would be dangerous, as the common thought it was that the treasure was buried in a graveyard, consecrated ground, and it was. We thought it best to dig it up at night, so we waited until dark with an empty half-quartern sack and shovels, and for the faith mage to leave for the night. We played the hazel rods for hours, walking up and down the graveyard, and we were about to give up when the rods moved together and crossed right under the only oak tree. The grave was simple, just a plain worn headstone. The carved writing had long since faded to be illegible. We got stuck in, and eventually, after digging at least 6 foot, we unearthed a coffin. Well, seeing a coffin go into the ground at a funeral is one thing, but digging one up at the dead of night is another. You could sense something in the air. I tell you, something not natural, not right. We began to get the jitters, and we were deliberating whether we should open the coffin or not, when all of a sudden a fierce wind rose up so high, so blustering and loud, we all turned as white as ghosts. Our rods stood stock still. The candles and torches we had brought were extinguished, all except one. Hastily, we scattered and displaced the earth back over the coffin. But as we were doing so, our fate was sealed, right there and then. Cruikshank stopped talking. He was out of breath, and clearly the memory of that night still shadowed him. He took off his neck scarf and dabbed his face and forehead with it. "Can I get you some ale?" Drabble offered. By now his glasses were on the end of his nose. Cruikshank shook his head and continued. A strange howling out of the skies came, and right before us an apparition of a man appeared, finely dressed, and waved his finger at us whilst cursing each and every one of us. "When the year joins itself, all will be dead," he warned. I'm sure if my hair wasn't already white, it would have been after that. My feet had frozen to the ground. We all looked at each other, not knowing what to think or do. But Boyter, the village tinkerer, had studied to become a monk once, so he stood firm and boldly proclaimed the correct chanting for the dismissal of a wraith set to guard the treasure. Once his commands were finished, all was quiet again. The apparition had fled or disappeared, and we ran back to our homes. Cruikshank was silent once more. Only the crackle of the fire could be heard. Drabble gathered his thoughts. "I see. But what of the wraith's warning? You seem unharmed?" "I'm unharmed, yes. But not so the others. Each of them have died. Some in horrific ways these past days, and I'm not dead because the curse's year ends tonight at midnight." His words trailed off. His body slumped, and his eyes grew weary. Drabble quickly stood, left the room, and returned after a short while with a glass in hand. "Here, it's honeybee mead." Cruikshank took the glass and sipped. This seemed to lift his spirits. Excuse the pun. "You have to help me. You have to find a way to lift the curse, or I'm a dead man." "I will do all I can," Drabble offered. "On one condition. You tell me where the treasure is hidden." Cruikshank's disbelief and shock was visibly present on his face. "But the curse! You don't understand! You'll be cursed, man!" "Nevertheless, these are my terms." Drabble held his ground. After short reflection, Cruikshank agreed. Drabble was overjoyed and told Cruikshank to take a flask and give a sample of his water. Once given, Cruikshank left to fetch his map. Drabble eagerly examined the colour and consistency of the fresh urine and studied the size and arrangement of the bubbles when first poured into his divination bowl. He consulted his wheel of prognosis and divination charts and tables. His conclusion shocked him. An hour or two passed. Drabble continued to see his clients. Cruikshank returned with the map as promised and pointed out the spots where they found the buried coffin. To Drabble's amazement, it was right here in this village. He had frequented the churchyard many times and had even used his dowsing rods there once before. They made arrangements to undertake the dig under the cover of darkness and agreed to meet at the church at 7 o'clock when the light would have been enveloped. They even shook hands on the deal. The rest of the day seemed to drag for Drabble, as you can imagine. He was examining other people's urine, looking at it, sniffing it, even tasting it. But all the while his heart and mind were with the buried treasure. He knew something Cruikshank didn't, though. He knew what was in the coffin. From his examinations of Cruikshank's urine and complicated calculations, Drabble knew what the clockmaker, an amateur treasure-seeker, had stumbled upon. It was the final resting place of Mortimer Mungo III, Royal Astromancer and Master Water Scryer, Drabble thought. From water scrying Cruikshank's urine, the prediction was a 1 in a million chance. He was destined to find the Book of Secrets through helping Cruikshank rid himself of the curse. The book shall be his reward. At last the final client left his practice. Mr. Grabble asked of Drabble's services if it would be good for him to join a shipping voyage to the Aniverse, situated in the southern realm of Edra. His answer was yes, by the way. Drabble packed a knapsack with various objects he felt he may need: dowsing rods, a small torch with tinderbox, and the Holy Book. He slipped over his head and around his neck his simple metal protective talisman, and left by the back door. He grabbed his shovel and proceeded to make his way to the church. Excitement rattled through his body. Cruikshank stood, lantern raised, under the tall wooden archway entrance, which was covered with foliage, to the graveyard. The low stone wall that ran the perimeter was also overgrown with vines and plants, and small animals had made their homes here too. The sounds of the night could be softly heard as Drabble approached, his torch now lit. "How do?" Cruikshank nodded as they entered the graveyard. Drabble nodded in return but remained silent as Cruikshank led the way. The pathway was slightly mossy, so they proceeded with caution, their dim lights only keeping the darkness at bay for a small area. They passed headstone after headstone, grave after grave, monument after monument. All had succumbed to the enduring march of nature, as moss, vines, and several flowers lived amongst the dead. Eventually, deep in the graveyard, Cruikshank stopped and placed his lantern down on the grass. He pointed to a spot just in front of a worn headstone. Drabble put his knapsack down, thrust his wooden torch into the ground so it remained upright, and rummaged for his dowsing rods. Once he found them, he quickly got to work. His hands were shaking. "Damn," he muttered. But after a short while they settled, and he held up the rods so they pointed straight out in front of his body and began to walk towards the headstone. Nothing happened at first. But slowly, each rod began to move. They edged towards each other and finally crossed. Drabble stood still and signalled for Cruikshank to hand him his shovel. He did so, and they both began to dig. Sweat began to pour from their foreheads as they dug deeper and deeper. The earth was damp, and its strong smell hit their nostrils hard. Suddenly, they heard a dull thud. They had hit the lid of the coffin. They both stopped, looked at each other, and fear began to creep up inside of them. "Keep digging. We need to get all of the earth off the lid," Drabble shouted as suddenly the wind began to howl. They continued to remove the dirt. Drops of rain began to fall, slowly at first, then faster. The howling became stronger and more fierce, until Drabble realised it wasn't the wind making the noise. "It's here!" Cruikshank shouted, his eyes wide and his mouth open. Drabble looked to where Cruikshank was staring. He couldn't believe what he was seeing. Floating several feet above the ground was the ghostly apparition of Mortimer Mungo III, Royal Astromancer and Master Water Scryer. He studied his portrait on many occasions. Long face with proud bone structure, intelligent eyes, sharp nose, thick moustache, and long black wavy hair. "You defile my grave once more," the apparition accused, its deathly tone vibrating through the air. "Have you forgotten my promise? When the year joins itself, all will be dead." Cruikshank fell to his knees. "Mercy, please, I beg of you, mercy upon my soul." "Mercy? You show no shame, returning to steal what is not yours. You have no soul," Mortimer Mungo raged. Cruikshank stood and cowered. Drabble saw his chance. While Mortimer Mungo was conversing with Cruikshank, he jemmied the coffin lid with the tip of his shovel. The wooden lid gave way, and a small cloud of dust and earth was expelled. Drabble dropped his shovel and heaved the lid open as fast as he could. What lay before him was the naked bones of a skeleton and several objects. The moon's light catching what appeared to be gemstones and gold. Both arm bones of the skeleton were crossed as though they were hugging the thick, large rectangle he knew to be a book that lay underneath. Drabble reached down and prized open the bone arms. They fell away with ease. He gently lifted the book and brought it close to his face. He closed his eyes and sniffed the musty tome with deep satisfaction. This wasn't just any old book. This was the fabled Book of Secrets. He scrambled up and out of the hole, dirt tumbling down onto the coffin, his fingernails clogged with the consecrated earth. With much effort, he managed to reach the top and haul himself onto the side of the grave. The rain cascaded upon him as he stumbled to his feet. As he began to search frantically through the soft pages, the rain splattered and splashed heavily. Eventually, and with enough moonlight, he found the passage he hoped would save their lives, and began reciting the ancient curse-breaker, his words sturdy and assured. "In the name of Urcry, I command you to leave this plane of existence. The doors of perception are closed to you. Take back the hex of death, and may the light of pure love purge all corruption from your soul. You are the love, you are the light, you are the essence, and none shall besmirch your sacred being." Lightning crashed from the skies, cutting through the rain, cutting through the wraith, cutting through the darkness. Silence prevailed. The skies were dry once more, and the air was cleansed. Drabble could taste the purity now present. Mortimer Mungo was no longer in front of him. Exhausted, Drabble looked into the grave and saw Cruikshank slumped over the coffin. And now the scrying forecast issued by the Guild of Scryers at 0543 on Werner Day. There is no expected myth magic slippage in any areas. The general synopsis at 0600. High, 60 miles east of Crooked Smile Island, stabilising with slight drifting south. Drabble began his note-taking, his handwriting neat and precise. The area magical forecast for the next 24 hours. Bladesmith, north, becoming variable at times 1 to 3, smooth or slight. Static magic splutters later. Moderate or good, occasionally very poor. Spriggan, variable 6 or 7, smooth or slight, occasionally swift at first. Fair, good. Firedrake, variable 4 or 5, slight or moderate. Gentle myth magic sprinklings in west. Horn of Destruction, variable becoming southeasterly later, 2 to 5, slight or moderate. Heavy downpour of mystic fog with spikes of electro-ether patches. Moderate or good, occasionally very solid later. Suddenly the shrill, high-pitched noise of the kettle boiling cut into Drabble's concentration. He swiftly attended to his tonic in the kitchen, carefully pouring the hot water over a mixture of various herbs. Lastly, he scooped a spoonful of fresh dried honey and dunked it into the cup. 5 brisk stirs later, and he was on his way up the wooden staircase and into his guest room. He crossed the floor, trying to walk softly upon the wooden floorboards, placed the cup on the bedside table and drew the curtain. Warm, bright sunlight flooded in. He turned and looked at his guest, who was still asleep in the bed, the white blankets pulled tight around him. Drabble whispered a morning prayer just as his guest awoke. "You're too good to me, Mr. Drabble, you really are." The voice sleepy and fragile. "Nonsense, Cruikshank, nonsense," Drabble replied. "The least I can do. Hot honey tea for you," he said, indicating the bedside table. "I swear there's more than just honey in it," Cruikshank smiled. "Just friendship, Cruikshank. That's all," his words warm. The brass knocker from downstairs thundered the moment away. "I'd best go. Rest well, Cruikshank," he said as he closed the door behind him and made his way to the front door. "Molly, come in, come in." He welcomed her with the warmest smile this side of Edra. "How are you?" As Drabble walked to his oak table, Molly began a whirlwind of words, all tumbling from her mouth, her excitement barely contained. He sat down and began to take notes. He smiled to himself reassuringly as he glanced at the Book of Secrets he had placed lovingly next to his glass divination bowl. This was his new addition to his ordered and routine world. This was his treasure. Mythical Tales from Edra, Curse of the Peace Prophet, written by K.R. Boyter. Find out more by visiting www.patreon.com/Mythical Tales from Edra.
Okay, that was a reading by Ken Boyter for this week's Rhyolite Zone. You're listening to The Art Show on 106.6 FM at Wycombe Sound. I'm your host, Dane Cobain. We're going to be joined by Ken in a little bit, but before we do that, let's have some music. So this is In the Name of Progress by Without My Addiction.
outlook. Don't care for who you hurt. You've got a cynical smile that no one cares for. You've been locked out in the darkness and left by all your friends. All this time that you've been blinded by the sight of progress. Now see you standing there alone, and all your friends are gone. Not for you, no by now. Don't you ever learn, don't you ever
You could be driving in your car. You could be walking your dog. You might just be working. But whatever you're doing, you're also listening to Wycombe Sound 106.6 FM. And if you're in business, your potential new customers could be listening too. So talk to them and let them know what you have to offer. Radio is a cost-effective and proven way to get your message across. And Wycombe Sound 106.6 FM could put together an affordable package that could work for you. So call 01494 449900 or email contact@wycombesound.org.uk.
Someone jogging, walking their dog or working out in the park is highly likely to have COVID-19. This is a national health emergency. Around 1 in 3 people have no symptoms and are spreading it without knowing. So exercise locally. If you're on your own, you can meet one other person. But keep your distance. Exercise, don't socialize. And wash your hands the moment you get home. Stop the spread. Stick to the rules. If you bend the rules, people will die. Stay home. Protect the NHS. Save lives.
Small Genie snuck off to the city, strung out on lasers and slashback blazers, and ate all your razors while pulling the waiters, talking about Monroe and walking on Snow White. New York's a go-go and everything tastes nice. Oh, little Greenie, ooh-hoo. Genie lives on his back. Genie loves chili stacks. He's outrageous, he screams and he balls. Genie, let yourself go. Sits like a man, but he smiles like a reptile. She loves him, but just for a short while. She's scratching the sand, won't let go of his hand. He says he's a beautician, sells you nutrition, and keeps all your dead hair for making up underwear. Poor little Greenie. Ooh-hoo. Genie lives on his back. Genie loves chili stacks. He's outrageous, he screams and he balls. Genie, let yourself go. So simple-minded, can't drive his mojo. Bites on the neon, sleeps in a capsule. Loves to be loved. Loves to be loved. Lives on his back. Genie loves chili stacks. He's outrageous, he screams and he balls. Genie, let yourself go. Genie lives on his back. Genie loves chili stacks. He's outrageous, he screams and he balls. Genie, let yourself go. You betcha.
Gene Genie by Radio Generation, and before that we had In the Name of Progress by Without My Addiction. You're listening to The Art Show on 106.6 FM Wycombe Sound. I'm your host, Dane Cobain, and I'm joined this week by writer, medium, actor, artist, and, you know, YouTube host. He does everything. The man does everything. He's the only person I know whose output is bigger than mine. So over to Ken Boyter.
The first question is, what was the last book that you read and what did you think of it?
The last book that I read, well, that's very interesting. The Name of the Wind was the last book that I read. Patrick, I can never pronounce his surname, Rothfuss, I think it. Yeah. And I had, I hate to say it, I abandoned it. It's still sort of there on my desk, just wondering, should I pick it back up? I got about, I don't know, it was about 160, 170 pages in. It's quite a thick book. It's about 400 pages, I think. And I really like the beginning. I love the beginning. It was an innkeeper in a spooky sort of tavern. You're not quite sure what's going on. There's locals that are chatting amongst themselves. It's a dark, windswept evening. And then in come another character, and you think, oh, and then there's demons on the road, and you think, yeah, this is going to be good. And then it all sort of twists. There's like a storyteller character comes in and says, yeah, I'm collecting people's life stories. I'd like to know about yours, innkeeper. I know who you really are. And you think, okay, that's intriguing. And then he just takes you right back to the storyteller's childhood. And you think, okay, that's cool. Good. Yeah. Keep it going. Yeah. Yeah. Things happen. Yeah. Yeah. And it's like, it's like lost its way for me.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I abandoned it, and I thought, and it coincided. It was my birthday a couple of weeks ago. And one of the presents I got was the complete works of Sherlock Holmes.
Mm-hmm.
So I thought, you know what? Have I read all of them? Not sure. I know. I might just start at the beginning. So I've now delved into a study in Scarlet. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
The first novel. So I thought, let's go back to the beginning. So that's kind of what I'm currently reading now. So it's not sci-fi, but it is Sherlock Holmes. So another classic there.
Nice. Yeah. It's funny because the Name of the Wind is one of those books. It keeps getting recommended to me, and I've had the same thing because I know how big it is. Yeah. I can't be bothered, to be honest. Like and it's the same with a lot of fantasy series. Like I don't want to get invested in them because then I know I'll have to force myself to keep reading.
Yeah. It can work. It can work if you've got a series of books like Game of Thrones, for example, A Song of Ice and Fire. I got into that, X amount of years ago. Luckily, all of the books have been written, so I was a latecomer to the book, so I didn't have to suffer that 4 or 5 years in between book scenario. I could just plow on, and I absolutely loved every single one of it. The problem now is, obviously, he's not written the next one, and will he ever? It's that kind of thing. And then, of course, the TV show comes out, and they did a really good job right up until the last series, and then they ruined it. So. But I probably will, if he does ever finish the next one, I will start reading it because I just absolutely adored it. So sometimes it really works well if you've got a series that you're really into.
Yeah. I mean, I actually had that with the Witcher books. I not long ago finished reading the Witcher series, and I was just doing kind of a book a month, and that was all right for me because I'd read one of the Witcher books and then I'd go off for the rest of the month, read whatever I wanted to, and then I'd come back to it the next month and staggered it a little bit,
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay. So I want to chat to you obviously about your writing, and so you hit your 30,000 words in a month, which you were very pleased about. And I just wondered, could you let us know a little bit about what the writing process looks like for you?
Okay, so for me, it's one of those things where I find deadlines really work for me, as in sort of not necessarily set my own deadlines because they can just quite easily be broken, but other people's deadlines. So for this, there still is a competition running, although actually if this goes out later on in the month, the closing date is the 14th or 16th of May. And this was the sort of, I think the 28th, 29th of March that I've discovered this Chicken House publisher and the Times newspaper teamed up, competition, write a children's novel, minimum 30,000 words, maximum 80,000 words. I thought, you know what? I could do that. I know it's crazy, but I've got a month. Surely, if I can write 1,000, maybe 1,500 words a day, I can do it, and then still have time to proofread it and kind of polish it a little bit. Not necessarily as much as you'd like, because you'd probably spend 2 or 3 months polishing a book, certainly a novel. But I thought, you know what? If I can do this, it's a good challenge for myself. And I just did that. I just sat down. I had a minimum of 500 words a day. And normally, I think most days, apart from one, I did reach 1,000. Some days I might go over. So obviously you could let yourself off a little bit the next day. And for me, I just thought, you know what? I can't afford to have any writer's block or be too precious about it. This is more about digging in deep, sitting down, don't get distracted, you know, and just finding that zone. And I think that's really important. And the only way to do it for me was just do it. As soon as you start writing, I feel like it then can flow. Some days better than others. Some days, you know, were a little bit tougher. And others, obviously, I don't know about you in your writing process, sometimes you think, oh, I need to go off and research that bit. So it's going to slow you down. And I just didn't let anything kind of put me off. I had to put at the back of my mind, is it any good? Oh, this is going to be rubbish. Well, now, you know, the character's well developed, all of that. I just had to put that to one side and think, right, the target is to finish that first draft.
Yeah.
And once I've got that, if I've got any time after that, then I can polish it. So that was basically, it's a bit arbitrary. It's not like romantic writing and I could sit down by the river and smoke a pipe and, you know, and it's, listen to the birds and all of that. No, it was a bit more kind of hardcore than that. But I really enjoy it though. I still enjoy that process anyway.
Cool. And I mean, you do something sort of similar with your Patreons, don't you? Because you have your Patreon account, which you're free to give a shout out to if you'd like. And so you have your challenge there to do a short story a month as well. So do you think that set you up in good stead?
Absolutely. So thank you for mentioning the Patreon. Mythical Tales from Edra is the sort of universe. So Edra is my universe, you know, the Middle Earth equivalent. And so I thought, right, I know every single bit of writing I'm going to do, I'm going to build upon this world. So a bit like Terry Pratchett, it's a Discworld novel. You kind of know what you're getting, but it'd be different characters. It might be the same character, but a different story. So that's kind of the model I'm working on. And what I decided to do was, again, the deadlines. I don't like letting people down. So if I know patrons are paying, you know, £5 a month for a short story, then I've got to deliver. And I found it so good because I just get on with it. I enjoy doing it. And it does mean, that you are, it's like anything, isn't it? If you're in the habit of doing something, it tends to you fall into it a lot easier. So pretty much the first of each month, I sit down, I start writing. Then I can do about, again, 1,000 words a day. That means obviously 5 or 6 days I've got the short story. I'll then spend a bit of time polishing it up. Then Sally, who proofreads all my stuff, very kindly proofreads it. And then we do the correction. So it gets proofread a couple of times. I've changed stuff. And I find that I can do that. So far, I've not been stuck for an idea, because when I started, I thought, each month, how am I going to get an idea? And do you know what? I just put it out to the universe. I just say, right, I'm going to have an idea. It will come. So what I find is once I've finished the story, then in the back of my head, maybe, you know, subconsciously, I'm working on the next one. So then by the first of each month, I go, yep, got that idea. And then I'll flesh it out a bit and then off I go. So it definitely stood me in good stead, because it's just that it's just the habit and routine of writing, really. I think that really helps.
Cool. And one of the things I find interesting, obviously you have a theatrical background as well. You've done a lot of acting, extra work, all kinds of stuff. Do you think that helps you when it comes to writing? Like, have you been able to absorb sort of good storytelling from the theatrical pieces you've done?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think at the heart, I'm a storyteller. And I think that, you know, and that sounds very pretentious, and that's in whatever medium. You know, I've even written song lyrics. My mum was a piano teacher and player, And we wrote a musical together, and I'd written the lyrics. I'd never written lyrics before, so again, it's like, how do I do that? And so it's like, well, actually, nothing's really different, because any sort of, music, art, writing is storytelling. Performing, acting is storytelling. And so my first criteria is, right, is this entertaining? Is it a good story? Are the characters well developed? And are they going to be, intriguing enough for that person to want to sit and watch this, or listen to it, or read it? And that's kind of where I'm coming from. So when, I started writing plays as well. A couple of years ago, I was up in Edinburgh Fringe. I'd always wanted to go to the Fringe as an actor. And it was like, I was very close to being cast in a play to go up to the Fringe. But if I'm honest, I'm quite glad I didn't get it, because I didn't think the writing and the play was good enough. But I just thought, it'd be a great experience. I've always wanted to act there. I didn't get the part. I came second. And then it was always, I started to drift into thinking, well, if I'm going to be in performances, actually, to be able to write something, then you can really tailor make it to your style of acting.
Yeah.
And that's kind of where, it was the Storyteller's Apprentice. So I took one of my existing characters from my book, Loquacious Macabre, and just and brought him to life, and really the character was sort of based on me anyway, so it was very easy and therefore very enjoyable to play. So I love that process. So I think it all helps, and if you can visualize a story, I don't know if you like you and your writing, I kind of write it not quite like a film, but I visualize it very strongly and then kind of just describe what's going on.
All right, you're listening to The Archer on 106.6 FM Wycombe Sound. I'm your host, Dane Cobain. I'm here in conversation with Ken Boyter. Time for a quick music break and a correction as well, because I've been pronouncing this lady's name wrong so many times. I keep calling her Heather Innes. And isn't it Heather Innes? Heather Innes. Heather Ines? It's Heather, anyway, and with war scars.
Couldn't understand why we moved around so much, why I had 9 schools in my youth. I was born since that war, so how could I know why you found it so hard to face the truth? Dunkirk, the Middle East, were memories buried deep. You refused to talk about that war you'd been through. Instead you found your peace, fishing lonely lochs and streams, or tending plants in each garden that you grew. Hoping the grass was greener, you moved our family on, seeking peace beyond each horizon new. You became a travelling salesman to keep those demons at bay until retirement and your dreams you could pursue. Dunkirk, the Middle East, were memories buried deep. You refused to talk about that war you'd been through. Instead you found your peace, fishing lonely lochs and streams, or tending plants in each garden that you grew. You couldn't share your feelings buried deep within, finding fault, something to blame in each new place. The bright Australian sun, dog poo on the streets, your reasons became more crazy to embrace. Dunkirk, the Middle East, were memories buried deep. You refused to talk about that war you'd been through. Instead you found your peace, fishing lonely lochs and streams, or tending plants in each garden that you grew. You believed in that war, they said you came home unscathed, but peace was an illusion you couldn't embrace. They were wrong, you lost your life, fighting for their empire, forever running from horrors you had to face. Dunkirk, the Middle East, were memories buried deep. You refused to talk about that war you'd been through. Instead you found your peace, fishing lonely lochs and streams, or tending plants in each garden that you grew. Dunkirk, the Middle East, were memories buried deep. You refused to talk about that war you'd been through. Instead you found your peace, fishing lonely lochs and streams, or tending plants in each garden that you grew.
That was Heather, I want to say, Inez? Heather Ines. Heather Inez. Heather. That was Heather with War Scars. And you're listening to The Art Show on 106.6 FM Wycombe Sound. I'm your host, Dane Cobain, and I'm joined here in conversation by this week's guest, who is Ken Boyter.
Yeah, for sure. Cool. And one of the things that I'm particularly interested in, because you've been in over 150 murder mysteries, and I have murder mysteries. And so I wondered, what do you think makes for a really good murder mystery?
Well, the murder mysteries that I act in, and do you mind if I give a shout out to the company?
Go for it, yeah.
Okay, so they're a fantastic company. They've been going about 20 years. I think I've acted in about 10 years worth of it. Or no, maybe they've been going about 15 years. Anyway, The Killing Game. And the way that they write them, it's character driven. It really is character driven. So they do evening plots, which starts at 7:30, finishes about 11. And they're 5 characters, 5 actors, and they do it where they have little scenes, and you kind of, so you get to know the characters through the scenes, but also we interact with the audience. So they ask us anything, and it's meant to be like real life. So if somebody says, oh, you're having an affair, you'd go, sorry, I've just met you, and you're what? So they really have to dig deep for it. The weekend ones are the same thing, but extended over 3 periods. And for me, it's because I don't want to give too much away, but it is to do with the characters, because they are set in everyday life. They're not exaggerated, so they're not cliched characters. One might be an accountant, one might be, a school teacher, and they normally have sort of themes. So it might be that one actually that I really enjoyed. There was one was a sci-fi convention. So the audience are playing sort of sci-fi guests, they're there for this convention. And it was an old TV show, and it was like the cast celebrating 20 years. So of course their lives have moved on. They're not as, young as they once were. And then it's sort of all the cracks appear between the characters. And again, it's keeping it's keeping them interested, the audience interested and intrigued about the characters and why the motivations, and trying to get the links between the characters and who would be doing this and why would they be doing that. So for me, it's kind of, I know I keep saying characters, but it really is the characters, because if they're not invested in the characters, they won't care. As soon as someone dies, I've heard them sort of go, oh no, not Graham. I really like Graham, and you sort of go, oh, that's a shame, but I'm going home now. But yeah, and I've even had it where I've died on like, because what you do is some of the deaths are outside the room, and there might be a little bit around the hotel, and you just wait there. You just wait until that they want the audience to find you. So the other actors sort of go, have you seen Graham? He's not been around. Do you reckon he's at the bar? And they try to get them out of the room. And then eventually someone find it. But this time the coordinator said, yeah, no, this is a great room. Why don't you just lie down on the boardroom table with the knife sticking out? I was like, okay, that's cool. So I'm waiting. And then I just hear the door open and cut. Okay, good, they found me. And then I heard that, oh no, not Graham, or whatever the character's called. And then I got a kiss on the lips. Like, hang on, this is wrong on all sorts of levels. You're kissing a corpse for a start. So yeah, so there's lots of crazy things that happen, but they are good fun, the actual acting in murder mysteries, because again, there are little mini scenes, so you do have to learn lines, and you have to learn the backstory. Oh my God, you can't get your backstory wrong, because if you make up something that's not correct, they might say, your wife said that you were right-handed, but you're left-handed. And they then think it's a wrong clue. There's enough false, red herrings in there.
Yeah.
But I also like the ad-libbing aspect as well, because you chat to them in between. But again, you still have to be in character. So, yeah. So I think it's all about character with murder mystery.
Cool. And I mean, I suppose a similar thing's true going into, again, like into fantasy and science fiction and stuff like that. So, I mean, do you ever find it a challenge to balance kind of the world building and the creating this, mythical world, and actually making sure that it's still all about characters at the heart of it?
Yeah, that is a very good point. And I think there is definitely an art to doing that. And especially when I've been writing short stories, I've written about 20 short stories now in a row, one a month. And what I figured was, and previously I'd been writing like one short story every couple of years for a local writers group. And they weren't fantasy, they were sort of nostalgic looks back in my life. So what I realized with short stories is they're snapshots of someone's life. It's not a sort of, although it still has to have a beginning, middle and end, it's a snapshot. So I tend to focus on one main character. I tend to then put them in their setting. So you get a build up of what they're like, what their lives are like at the moment, maybe, what they're thinking about, their desires, what's going on. And then, of course, you need a story to happen. So you need some conflict. You need something to happen to push. What's the word? Propel. That's the word. Although I like push as well.
Yeah.
Propel the story along. And then you can reveal the character within the story. But equally, you've still got to world build. And something that I'm realizing is that, again, if it's fantasy, sci-fi, horror, as you know, it's good to be consistent with your world. So I'm now considering, and I will do it when I get time, putting up on my Tales from Edra website an actual kind of compendium where I'll have sort of each character, what they're about, where they live, what their job is, all of that. And equally, the countries of it, the calendar, and just put the world building up. And that's not necessarily for the public. Well, it will be for the public, but it's for me, because I look back and go, right, I'm writing about this character again. Oh yeah, what's he all about, or what's she all about? So I don't want to get caught out necessarily with broken world building. Yeah. So yeah, you do have to find the balance. And I think for me, short stories are kind of like a little glimpse into people's lives. So I think, again, it is character led, but if you can set the scene with the world building, that's great. With a novel, then yeah, you've got a bit more space, I think, to make it a bit more of an epic story, like Lord of the Rings, for example.
Yeah. And I mean, I suppose as well, one of the advantages that, you're using the same world for each of your stories is actually a bit like the Discworld. You can kind of drip feed different bits in, So, Discworld, you might have a story set entirely in Ankh-Morpork. So you don't need to know about Clatch or wherever else, and then you can kind of slowly add to it over time.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And that's the good thing about it, because when I started writing my epic verse poem fantasy, The Legends of Grimace Ironblood, I actually spent a lot of time world building. And I remember someone saying to me at the time, when are you actually going to start this thing? You constantly talk about the world and all that. And I thought, actually, yeah, that's a good point, because you could spend, like Tolkien did, you spend years doing and not necessarily writing the story. And I thought, do you know what? I've got enough now to actually start writing the story, the actual plot that I've thought of. Let's do that. And then consequently, that was the first thing that I did within Edra. And so the stories, I sort of do still refer back to that, because that's like, oh, okay, that's where a lot of the world building was made. But yeah, like you say, I love then I look at the map, because I drew a map of Edra, and I think, oh, I don't even know what that sort of little town is called. I've not even named it on the map. Okay, let's write about somebody who lives there. And again, it just builds up. I'm doing a game book as well. I don't know if you know about these choose your own adventure type, the audience, that the reader sort of picks how the story unfolds. And again, I've said it in the world of Edra, and I've used a character that I've written about before, because I think she would be good, and all of that. And then it's like, the problem now is that I'm really having to sort of go, right, I can't remember now what town that wasn't named on the map. Have I named it now in my game book, or have I named it in a short story? So I am getting to the stage now where I do definitely need to start making lists. If you're a big fan of lists, then it's a great thing.
Cool. And you were kind of saying as well, hopefully you'll get some stuff up on your website when you have time. How do you have time to do all of your different stuff? Because we haven't even mentioned, you do art as well. You do a bit of graphic design here and there. You're a medium. Like, how do you find time to balance all of that with your writing, with your acting, and with everything else?
Just get very, very drunk. That's no, That is a very good point. My weakness is I like taking on far too many projects, and so I do have to watch that. But I think it's a balancing act. It's a juggling act. With my art, for example, that I've never really pushed that to sort of. I kind of tried selling some stuff, but I never really pushed it. So for me, it's just as and when. Like, so for today, I've been watching the snooker. And I've just been working on well, this is radio, you can't really say, but so I've been sort of, and it's for me like anything, it's finding your voice, it's finding exactly what you want to do. So I've just been working on, I've just been doing these canvas ink drawings that are kind of like, you know, Dungeons and Dragons where you have top-down maps.
Yeah,
it's like that. So I really like those, and I have played Dungeons and Dragons before, but obviously sometimes, you know, you can't get enough people to commit and you know and for a whole year. So I just thought, do you know what? Why don't I just start drawing these type of maps? And so I just thought, I'm just going to put my ink skills, because I do like drawing, you know, ink on paper initially. And I thought, actually, if I do it straight onto canvas, it sort of makes it a bit more, I don't know, art worthy. You know, it's actually on canvas. And I really enjoyed doing that. And so again, that because that's not pressured, it's like, well, I'll just do it as and when. But then I discovered, of course, do you remember, I remember Flash Gordon. You remember the film Flash Gordon?
Vaguely, yeah. I haven't seen it for a while. Gordon's alive!
Gordon's alive, exactly. Well, you watched it recently. He doesn't shout that line, by the way. Everyone thinks he does, but he just goes, Gordon's alive. And you go, what? That's disappointing. But anyway, as a kid, they released these stickers that you could collect. And on the back of them, they made a complete picture. So I remember sort of trying to match them all up to see what the picture was. And then I thought, I could do the same with these canvases.
Yeah.
So each one, because it's a map, I've just sort of carried on. So say there's a river that goes off the edge of one of them, I'll just carry that river on to the next canvas and the next canvas. And I thought, that might appeal to collectors, because they might think, actually, you know, I kind of want to collect and see what the whole map is. And again, it's sort of based loosely in Edra. You know, I'm just exploring it and having fun. So, and then, and with the mediumship, again, that's to do with, you know, it's not full time. I mean, it could be if I got a lot of people wanting to do it, but I just book clients in as and when, you know, normally it's about an hour session. I kind of normally go over. And it's kind of, but I think the reason why I've gone head on into doing lots of stuff is I'm very lazy. And so I remember as a kid being called lazy by a primary school teacher. I still remember her name. I don't know if she's alive anymore. I don't know if I should out to her, but and I just felt it wasn't very nice. And so that's always been a trigger. So if someone called me lazy, it's like, you know, because it's meant to be a dirty word, but I've learned to embrace it. But over the years, it's like, I'll show you, I'm not lazy, I'll do it. But I think my nature is pretty lazy. So again, it's balancing it. So if I know I've got a short story to write, but it is, sorry, I'm rambling. The actual focus is the writing.
Yeah.
Because I realize, well, look, if you're going to call yourself a writer and you're not writing, then you can't be a writer. And it's like these days you can self-publish. So there's no real excuse, because before you could go, well, what's the point of writing a novel? Because it's not going to get published. So what's the point of even doing it? But now you could go, well, I'll write it, I'll self-publish it, I'll write it. And I realized that if you're going to earn any sort of money from writing or creativity, I hate this word, but products, you've got to have the products. So you've got about 10 novels out, haven't you? So, you know, it's like, okay, and they might earn X amount each. So that might be a reasonable amount, you know, it's sort of, so again, it was like, right, I've just got to concentrate. So again, with the short stories, I'm going to eventually release those as collections. So probably at the moment, you know, if I've got 20, it might be 2 collections of 10 short stories. And then obviously that will keep going. I do want to do an audio version of my poetry book. I do also do audio versions of each short story as well for a different Patreon level. And again, every time I go, why am I doing this? It takes about 2 days to completely do them. But I thought, well, I enjoy doing them. I've had good feedback off people. And at the moment, you know, things aren't massively selling. It's not, and you kind of think, oh, sorry, I'm rambling. I'm going to just go on one more thing. I watched a documentary about David Bowie the other day.
Yeah.
And what I didn't realize, because I'm not a big David Bowie fan, I can appreciate that he's, you know, very talented and all of that, but I don't really like his music. But I was fascinated because he spent about 10 or 15 years being a failure, just flop after flop after flop, different band. And I just didn't realize that. But he just didn't give up. He just went, no, it is going to happen for me. And I think that you can extrapolate that to any type of creative thing, art, music, whatever. Keep going. If there's any advice I'd give, it's just keep going, keep doing it, and find your voice. Because he was in all sorts of different types of bands. Again, I didn't realize that. And so this is it. So for me, it was like once the fantasy clicked and like, oh yeah, this world of Edra. Oh, okay, yeah, I'm really finding my voice. I've got a storyteller that tells all the stories. I really like writing in his voice. So again, that kind of helps me get in the zone. The same with this art. It's like, oh, these are kind of like D&D maps. Cool. I've now got like a style.
Yeah.
So they might be slightly different from what else is out there. So again, it's you have to dig a lot of, I don't know, holes before you find the treasure.
Yeah, that's a really good metaphor. I like that. Cool. Okay. And just one final question to end on. Well, normally I'd ask what you're working on next, but I think we've kind of covered that. So, but where can people find out more, and where can they get your first book as well, your sort of narrative poetry collection?
Yeah. Well, so because I do have loads of things, if you want links to everything, then go to my own personal website, which is kenboyter.co.uk, and Boyter is spelled Boyter. If you want to go directly to Tales from Edra, it is talesfromedra.com, and Edra is EDRA. I do have a Patreon, as you mentioned, patreon.com/mythical tales from Edra. And then I also have, for the last 5-6 years, been hosting with my good friend Julian Newman Turner, the bottledimp.com YouTube channel. We've done pretty well, actually. We've got about 7,800 subscribers. We're coming up to close to 1 million views collectively. We've got about 450 videos, mainly reviews of fantasy. So those are all my kind of links. There is Facebook groups. So we've got the Bottled Imp Facebook group and also the Mythical Tales from Edra Facebook group. So you can find me there.
Thank you very much to Ken Boyter for joining me. You're listening to The Art Show on 106.6 FM Wycombe Sound. I'm your host, Dane Cobain, and it's time for a little bit more music. So this is Notice Me by the one and only Tom Bradley Jr.
Pick the post up at the door and cleaned up the floor, 'cause we don't talk anymore now. Broken memories left to waste, and I need a little space, 'cause we don't talk anymore now. But I hope she's doing fine without me, and I hope she changed her mind. Notice me, yeah. And I hope she's doing fine without me, and I hope she changed her mind and notice me. Empty places at the table now, and I'm out of place somehow, 'cause we don't talk anymore now. Broken memories left to waste, and but I hope she's doing fine without me. And I hope she changed her mind, notice me, yeah. And I hope she's doing fine without me. And I hope she changed her mind and notice me. Ooh, 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 but I hope she's doing fine without me. And I hope she changed her mind, notice me, yeah. And I hope she's doing fine without me, yeah. And I hope she changed her mind and notice me.
Hiya Bucks! That's not just me saying hello. Hiya Bucks is a magazine and website for Buckinghamshire, exploring the county, seeing the sights, meeting the delightful people and keeping up to speed with what's going on. We support local artisan producers, visit tiny libraries, meet ballet dancing estate agents and give away bottles of gin. Can you bear not to join in? Follow Hiya Bucks on social media. For daily readings, go to hiyabucks.com and look for the free Hiya Bucks glossy magazine.
Someone in your supermarket who's pushed the same trolley or held the same basket is highly likely to have COVID-19. This is a national health emergency. Around 1 in 3 people have no symptoms and are spreading it without knowing. So try to limit how often you shop and try to go alone. Always cover your nose and mouth, keep a safe distance and use hand sanitizer regularly. Stop the spread. Stick to the rules. If you bend the rules, people will die. Stay home, protect the NHS, save lives.
Lately I've been feeling kinda low about love. Lately I've been feeling like it's not enough. What happened to the buzz when we used to touch? Where did the magic go that we call love? So take me back to the river, take me back to your love. Take me back to the river, take me back to your heart. Oh, let your love wash over me, it's so clear to see. Take me back to the river, take me back to your heart. Oh, I don't wanna let go of everything we've got. Oh, I don't wanna be the one to say goodbye. But what happened to the buzz when we used to touch? Where did the magic go that we call love? So take me back to the river, take me back to your love. Take me back to the river, take me back to your heart. Let your love wash over me, it's so clear to see. Take me back to the river, take me back to your heart. Take me back and pull me closer. Take me back and be my lover. Take me back and pull me closer. Take me back and be my lover. Take me back and pull me closer. Take me back and be my lover. Take me back and pull me closer, closer. So take me back to the river. Take me back to your love. Take me back to the river. Take me back to your heart. Oh, let your love here to see. Take me back to the river, take me back to your heart. So take me back to the river, take me back to your love. Take me back to the river, take me back to your heart.
That was To the River by Lewis Branch. Before that, we had Notice Me by Tom Bradley Jr. You're listening to The Art Show on 106.6 FM Wycombe Sound. I'm your host, Dane Cobain, and it's time for us to go over to Twangling Jack Ford for our weekly album review. So over to Twangling Jack in the Oak Shed.
Television, Marquee Moon. Back in the mid-70s, there was famously a club in New York called CBGB's, and the bands that played there, the ones that became famous, were notably Blondie, the Ramones, the Talking Heads, and Television, who are probably now the least known, but at the time they were the first to get a record out, and this record was very popular, and it was sort of just pre-punk, but it appealed to people who liked standard rock music. It's got the title track, Marquee Moon, is 11 minutes long, and it's got almost Jerry Garcia type guitar on it. And at the time, that's not what I was interested in. I wanted to hear 3-minute pop songs with each solo only being the length of a chorus. So I didn't really give this the attention it deserved. Then later, in about the 90s, CDs got cheaper and I would buy things on spec and think, I'll give that another go. And I bought this. I also incidentally bought Grateful Dead CDs. I was doing a lot of driving, my life slowed down, I had time to listen to things. And if you seriously listen to this album, I mean, what can I say? It is absolutely brilliant. It should go top of your list of all the things I've said you should listen to. Having listened to it recently, so I could recommend it to you, there's a song on it called Guiding Light, and I think that is just absolute perfection. Marquee Moon by Television.
Thank you very much to Twangling Jack Ford for this week's album review. Thank you to everyone whose music I've shared. Thank you in particular to Ken Boyter for joining us for this week's Rhylight Zone and also for an interview. As always, you can let me know on dane.cobain@wycomesound.org.uk what you thought of the show. That's dane.cobain@wycomesound.org.uk. And I also particularly want to hear from local creatives or anybody who has any news, MP3s, or who thinks they would be a pretty good guest. I would love to talk to you guys. In the meantime, you can also listen to previous episodes on Catch Up on iTunes, Spotify, that kind of thing, by searching for The Art Show Wycombe Sound. And you can also find us on Facebook by searching the same, The Art Show on Wycombe Sound. So, until next week, I'm going to leave you with one last tune, and this is Robert Honor, another previous guest on the show, with his track, The Monster. I will see you next week.
Is there ever play one more, mate?
Yeah, of course I can, mate. Seems like everyone has stopped off for the night.
Yeah, they're gone.
I enjoyed it tonight, by the way. You feeling okay?
Yeah, right.
You want another drink?
Yeah.
This one's on the out.
I want to forget, I drink to forgive, but my legs have grown tired and my liver can't live. The path has grown dark, but the end is in sight. Why can't I manage just one sober night? My reflection looks back on what I've become, a rapid decline since 2001. The past is the past, but my future looks grim. You're probably right, you're safer with him. Well, I could be the monster that lurks beneath your bed, and I could be the dealer who keeps your veins well fed. I could be the siren that lures you to the rocks. You could be my chicken, and I will be your fox. I could be the bandit who's holding up your heart, and I can be a devil, but you knew that from the start. Well, I could be the virus infecting from within.
This is Wycombe Sound,